What's up, guys? So it's been a while. I've been keeping busy with client projects, but now it's time for a new screencast. So what's happened recently is that Angular 2 has gone RC, which means it's a release candidate, and we have the same situation for AspNet Core 1.0. So I've done a couple of series on using Angular 2 in Visual Studio and leveraging AspNet and what they used to call AspNet 5, which now is AspNet Core. And I've done a couple of upgrade videos since early betas, but a lot of things have changed quite drastically. So I figured it's time for a new screencast series where we're going to develop a simple seed project which will leverage AspNet Core 1.0 release candidate 2 for the moment and Angular 2 release candidate 1. So we're going to try to keep this as simple as possible and not do it as a play repo. So we're going to actually try to create a starter project, a seed project, if you will. So we're going to start from scratch here, and by the end of the screencast we're going to have a simple Angular 2 app running from Visual Studio 2015, and we're also going to try to leverage Gulp along with AspNet Core. Alright, so let's get started. And what we're going to try to accomplish is we're just going to take the Angular IO site and take the Get Started Quick Start guide, which says that we should be up and running in 5 minutes. And we're going to try to get this Quick Start app up and running in our VS2015 environment, which is going to be, we're not going to do things exactly as this guide tells us to do, because we want to leverage Visual Studio as well. So I think it's better if you guys come here and try to read the details for yourselves. To save some time, I'm just gonna jump right down to the bottom where we have, we can take a look at the project structure. So we're gonna have an app folder with a component and the boot file. And then we're going to have an index.html file and a systemjs config file that's going to configure our app. And those are really the important parts. Of course, the tsconfig and typings and all other files will be there as well. But we're going to structure the app a bit differently. So down here at the bottom, we have this simple starter project with all the files. So we're just going to try to jam these files into Visual Studio 2015 and compile our first NG2 app. So let's switch over to Visual Studio. And we're going to call this project AspNet Core Angular 2 Seed, because that's exactly what it is. And we're going to start off from an empty AspNet Core template. So, because we're not really going to use any AspNet Core features, we're just going to use it to serve our ng2 files. Let's get rid of this project readme. And in our startup file, we want to serve our file. So we're just going to add one simple middleware. So we're going to say use static files. So we want to be able to serve the files in our www root folder. And we can see here that we have RC2 final. And hopefully AspNet Core won't change that much from this. So since default files won't work, we're going to use our own middleware here. And we're going to pass in the context as a lambda. And this will need to return a task. We can just go task from result and then 0. But in here, we're gonna redirect to a file called index.html. So whenever we hit the root, we're gonna be redirected to index.html, since that's our main file that we want to serve to boot up our application. All right, now that we have that in place, I think we're not gonna do anything more with AspNet Core in this screencast at least. So now we're gonna get started with our ng2 app. And we're going to use Typescript, but instead of coding in our www root folder, we're going to create a virtual Typescript project which will contain all the Typescript files, and then we're going to copy them to our www root folder. So that's a bit different from how the quick start guides tells us to arrange stuff. So we're going to create a new folder here, call it scripts, add a new tsconfig. So we should find that there, tsconfig. We're going to copy the contents soon, so we won't need to exclude node modules or www because they won't live in here. We're going to have a separate virtual TypeScript project in this folder. So let's see what to do next. We should probably go ahead and create our index.html file as well. We're going to take the contents from the tutorial soon. Right, so now that we have that in place, let's come here and see what we need. So we're gonna create, let's start with typings to begin with. So in typings here, we can see that we are using Core.js for ES6 shims. Before we used something called ES6-shim, but now they want to use Core.js instead. So these kind of things keep changing, but let's just do what they want here. Let's create a typings.json file. Let's come back to Studio and just add a new JSON file. Let's do a JavaScript file, doesn't really matter, and call it typings.json. And let's actually switch to the command prompt and do it from there instead. So this is our AspNet Core Angela 2 seed, and in here we have the source folder, and then we have the actual project. So now we are at the correct place in our folder structure. And now let's run typings.init. Typings.init. Oh yeah, so that file already exists. Of course, I just created that from Visual Studio. But now let's see if we can find what was it called? The Core.js typings. So we can see that they are fetching it from GitHub because the source says DT, and that means GitHub. So we can go ahead here and search for what was it called? Core.js. And we should be able to find that typing in the repo. We can see here that the homepage is GitHub, but the source is DT. So we can go ahead and install this. And we're going to need to specify the source and then the tilde sign. And we're going to want to save this, and we want to pass in the global parameter, which is equivalent to passing in the ambient parameter before the 1.0 release. So there's been a couple of breaking changes here. So if you want to more know about how typings work, I urge you to go and check their GitHub repo. It's really richly documented. But we're not going to spend any time on talking about that, but let's see what just happened. Alright, so we're back and I've figured out what was wrong. So for some reason it seems that typings can't install things into directories that contains dash, or that's at least what I think, or if the path is too long. I kept getting these errors. It said something about an unexpected token. So I figured perhaps it's this dash sign or the path is too long. So I changed the directory back to cdev and ran the same command that I just did, and it worked just fine. So it installed core.js, but it installed it into the wrong place. But that's fine, now we know that. So we're gonna manually copy these files onto the right place, which is where they belong in our project. Alright, and now we can see that our typings.json changed. We are referencing core.js globally, and we can find the files here on the typings. So that's cool, and we're going to reference this file in our main.ts, and we're going to see why in a bit. So let's switch back to the tutorial. And this is actually me Googling about the error I just got. And let's copy paste the main.ts from app. Or let's actually start with the package JSON file because we haven't pulled anything down yet. So I'm just going to take this entire file and just drop it into my own packages.json file. So we're going to add a new item. It's going to be a npm configuration file. And one thing I don't like right off the start here is that for some reason they think that hiding this file in the project structure is a good idea. And that really doesn't make any sense for me. I don't want to come out to the Explorer to find this file. I want to find package.json in my project structure. So we're gonna unload this project, edit the xproj file, and we're gonna tell it not to hide a bar.json and not to hide package.json as well, because these settings really doesn't make any sense for me. So let's reload the project. Now we can see package.json in our project structure. We're just gonna copy paste in the file from the tutorial, and we're gonna get rid of a couple of things. So we're not gonna use the commands that they created for us there. We're gonna call it our AspNet Core Angular 2 seed. And let's get rid of the license. And we're gonna get systemjs, core.js, reflect metadata. That's good. We can get rid of this Angular 2 in memory web API. We're not gonna use that. And let's get Bootstrap, sure, but we're not gonna need these dev dependencies. Or we are actually gonna need one dev dependency, and that's Gulp, because we're gonna need Gulp to copy the files from the node modules catalog, which doesn't exist in the www.root folder, and we won't be able to reference the files from our index.html unless they are in our www.root folder. So we're gonna need an extra copy task, and we're going to use Gulp for that to copy in the entire node modules directory into our www.root folder. Let's call it lib in there. So let's use Gulp and get the latest version there. We're not going to use anything else. We want to use Visual Studio for the rest and not use any command line tools. Whoops. Zoomed in a bit there. Right, so let's save this up, and now Visual Studio is gonna go ahead and restore our dependencies. So I think it's a 50-50 chance if this will fail or not. Sometimes it fails and we're gonna need to force it from the command line, and sometimes it just works. Let's see. All right, so that was it. We actually managed to install all the packages. We didn't get any errors. As I said, it's 50-50. Sometimes it works and sometimes it don't. So the tooling is preview, so I'm gonna give them the benefit of the doubt. So now that we have our node modules catalog, which you can't see in our project structure either, we're gonna need to copy them into our www.root folder. So you can just open up a browser here and make sure that it actually exists. We can see we have something called node modules here. And we're gonna want to copy all these files into our www.root folder. So we can be a lot smarter here in the next screencast, or maybe I do it off screen. But for now, let's just get everything in there and make sure we can reference it. And before I do that, let's also get this system.config.js file and copy its contents into a similar file. We're gonna put it in the same directory as our index file, and this will be a JavaScript file, systemjs.config.js. Let's copy this in, and we're just gonna do one small modification. We're not gonna name the folder node modules. We're just gonna call it lib. We can get rid of this in-memory web API. And we can put this in lib as well. We can get rid, once again, of the web API here. And then we're gonna leave the rest as is. So if you want to know more about this, you can just go ahead and read the documentation about it. We're not going to spend any time on that for now. All right, so now let's go ahead and create our app in our Typescript folder. So we're going to add one component.ts file, app.component.ts. Let's go ahead and add that into an app folder. App. A TypeScript file, app.component.ts. Just paste in everything in there, and this should just work. Yeah, it found the dependencies under the node modules catalog, but we don't have the app components. Let's go ahead and copy paste that in as well. We actually have app component, right? So I thought we were doing main.ts, but let's do that as well. Right, so we're gonna need to configure our tsconfig, and we're gonna do that in a jiffy. Let's just add our new file here as well. Add a new item, TypeScript file. Let's call it main.ts. Copy paste that in as well, and let's configure ts accordingly to this tutorial. We're just gonna take the compiler options part. Right, and the important thing here is that we want to use the experimental decorators. Right, so that was what it was complaining about, and so that should go away once Visual Studio has figured out that we have put that into our file, which will do soon, I hope. Let's try to build this, and we should get a bunch of other errors. So now it can't find a bunch of names that are used in some TypeScript files. And that is because we are targeting ES5, and these libraries actually try to use things that's not available until ES6. So we're going to need to use shims for this. And the way to solve this, so I've seen quite many questions on Stack Overflow about this, and I've been emailed and I got comments on my previous videos on how to solve these kind of problems. So that's why we installed Core.js. So this was called, or was actually something different before. It was ES6 shim, but now they're using Core.js instead. Fine, but we're gonna just need to reference this in our boot ts file. And if we build now, those errors should go away because now we have shims for ES6 instead. And we are building. Right, so that's cool, but for now the JS files appear in our scripts folder, but we actually want them to appear in our www.root folder. So let's open our tsconfig. So we're gonna need to add another compiler option to our tsconfig JSON file, which will be the out there, and we're gonna go up a step and dive into www.root and then into app. If we save this up and build, we're gonna actually need to rebuild. So further on, we're gonna want to transpile the TypeScript files upon save. But for now, we're gonna need to build the project, or we can just add a command line that will run a TypeScript compiler in watch mode to watch the files for changes. But that's not really using Visual Studio for as the powerful tooling that it is. So I really hope that they implement support for transpiling upon save. I haven't found that option, but if you guys know how to do that, give me a hint on how to do that in the comment, or send me an email about it. Or even better, give me a pull request and I'll merge it into this ng2 AspNet Core seed project. But now we can see we have an app component and a main.ts in our app folder, and our index.html file, we haven't fixed that one yet. We're gonna come to index.html, copy the contents, and instead of referencing node modules here, which we don't even have, we're gonna copy our node modules into a lib folder. Right, and our systemjs is on that level, so that looks good, and we're gonna import app. If we take a look once again in systemjs config, we can see that app will be located in our app folder, which is correct, and we will find Angular under libangular and RxJS under librxjs. So now we are almost there. We can almost run our first ng2 app in this seed project, but the first thing we're going to need to do is to copy the actual dependencies into our root folder. So for that we're going to use Gulp. So let's go ahead and add a new Gulp file. Or before we do anything, actually, we're gonna import a new module called rimref, which we'll use to clean up our build. So rimref will delete an entire folder for us, which will be the lib folder. And under package.json, we can go ahead and add a new dependency to rimref. And we're gonna create our clean task. And what that's going to do, we're going to take in a callback, and we're just going to return rimref, then pass in the path that we want to delete, and that's going to be root folder and lib, and then we're going to pass in our callback. And now we want to create a new task that actually copies our dependencies to our root folder. I'm gonna call this copy libs or copy lib. It's gonna be a new function. Take the entire node modules catalog and all the files in there. We want to preserve the folder structure, so we're gonna go *** /* and we're gonna pipe this to gulp destination and to our root folder and then lib. Right, so this isn't effective at all, but it's gonna get us up and running so we can move on to more fun stuff. And let's try to run this from our Task Runner Explorer. We can see we have two tasks. We can run clean. And now let's run copy, and this will probably take a minute or so. So let's hit run, and I'll just cut here and start recording again once this is done. Right, so we're back. So that basically took 40 seconds, and I have a really fast SSD. So if you're running on an ancient disk, this will take forever. And Visual Studio almost died on me. It hung, and I thought that it would crash, but somehow it made it back. So now I think we are ready to go. Let's just come back to this tutorial and make sure that we haven't missed a file. And yeah, right, so we're gonna need the styles as well to make it look exactly as this tutorial. So let's just add a CSS in there as well. Styles.css. And as you can see, Visual Studio is really slow now, or it's my Dell XPS 13 that's burning up. I don't know which it is, but now we should be good to go. All the files are in place. Let's cross our fingers, press Ctrl F5. We don't need a debugger. And loading, and we got our first Angular 2 app. Yay, so it just worked on the first attempt. So pretty psyched to have our first version of our AspNet Core Angular 2 seed project running the release candidates. So I'm not going to try to upgrade the other repos. There were actually play repos for me to learn the technologies. So I'm hoping that this will take off, and we're going to add the backend parts, the controllers to fetch data from, and we're going to have integration tests for our APIs, and we're going to use Karma to test our Angular 2 app and so forth. So I'm hoping this will become a full-fledged Angular 2 AspNet Core seed project. because it really seems that people want to keep their backend and front end together. They want the front end parts to work in the www root folder, and they want the backend parts to live in the controllers folder and talk to the framework and things like that. Even though that's not my preferred way of working, I like to separate the backend from the front end, because I really don't like Visual Studio as a front end developing tool. And that's just my opinion, but a lot of people seem to have opinions about this, so I'm not gonna get into that religious war. This is just yet another seed project, which I'm hoping that people will start using. So I'm really psyched about doing the integration tests part on the AspNet Core project, or the AspNet Core part of this project, because I just added that to our real-world client project, and it's really simple to get up and running with integration tests with AspNet Core. So I hope you guys enjoyed this and that you will use this repo to start off your AspNet Core NG2 apps. And until next time, have a nice day, guys. Bye.